Marlowe asks why he's late, and he tells him that he was attending to a legal matter. The Governor General shoots back that he didn't get an absentee request, and Lucius retorts that if his scribe was allowed to come into these meetings, he could have any report that he wanted. Marlowe says no, and asks why he can't do his own work by himself. What's up everybody, Jeff here, and this week we're talking about one of the most requested masters in the whole game, because we're going to be covering Lucius, from the Guild and the Neverborn. So spoilers coming up for all of Lucius's stories, and you can find a list of them in the description below, so definitely check them out for yourself. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and check out the Discord and the Patreon to hang out with me and other members of the community and get some cool benefits. But now let's get into Lucius. Few people know the true power that Lucius Matheson wields. To most, he's the unassuming secretary of the Governor General, a powerful bureaucrat. Members of the Guild follow his every order, and he can summon forth the Guild Guard with the snap of his fingers. He rarely has to do so, preferring to rely on intimidation alone. He commands a select group of Guild members who show him unquestioned loyalty, and he holds the reins of the clandestine operations within the city. He demands two things from his people: loyalty and results. Anyone who fails to give him either are never heard from again. He has his share of enemies, but anyone who managed to get through his protective cordon is also never heard from again. Lucius is capable of protecting himself, but no one lives to tell how. Lucius walks into an interrogation room and stands across from Charles Hoffman. He tells the man that he was seen in the company of Arcanist terrorists that were involved with a train derailment. He tells him that the Governor General has come to believe that he is not involved with the Arcanists, but that they both believe that he may be able to help them to root out seditious activity. He tells him that there's been violence and rebellion in the mines in the north, and asks the man if he can help them stop it. Hoffman looks away from him, and Lucius tells him that he understands that a latent power was awakened in him from coming through the breach. He explains that it's not uncommon, and asks if he's demonstrated an affinity for constructs. He doesn't answer again, so Lucius tells him that he'll either help them, or they'll continue their investigation into his possible connections with the Arcanists. Hoffman suddenly looks up, and tells Lucius that they are going to help him. He's going to find the Arcanists and make them pay for what they've done to him, and he tells the secretary that he needs access to a lab and material. Lucius tells him, of course, he'll get everything he needs, including construct technology. After all, that's the office he'll be heading up. Hoffman asks him to explain, and Lucius clarifies construct human grafting. It's highly illegal, and it should lead them to the parties that they seek. Lucius continues on, but Hoffman stops listening to the words. After the event takes place, there's significant damage to the Governor General's mansion. Lucius and the Governor General stand out on the balcony as carpenters work on repairs inside. The Governor General asks Lucius if they have a report on the specific details of the event yet, and Lucius tells him they don't, as several books on the specifics of the energy wave were missing from the library archives. The Governor General speculates that it was Crid, and Lucius tells him it's unknown, but only the highest level guild officials had access to the books. The Governor General asks him if Crid has returned to her post yet, and when Lucius says no, he tells the man to report to him as soon as she returns. He then asks if Lucius got him the glasses he requested, and Lucius takes out a pair of dark lens spectacles and hands them to his boss. Governor General Kitchener asks him how long until it fades completely, and Lucius looks in his eyes to see that they have turned into black voids with purple and silver bands swimming in them. Lucius tells him that the glowing has subsided a bit, and he thinks they'll go back to normal within 4 or 5 days. Kitchener asks him what came of the scholars that witnessed his transformation during the event, and Lucius replies that they were disposed of, or they were missing. The Governor General nods, and tells him that when these men are finished repairing his study, that they should find themselves missing too. Lucius agrees, and Kitchener adds that he shouldn't have any agents involved, he should do it himself. As Lucius leaves, he considers that these workmen will be among the few who get to see his power manifest. Just like the rest, they will be unable to share his secret. A former guild agent comes to the Enclave, asking to speak with Samael Hopkins. The guards find him strange, and give him the runaround before he's made to wait, expecting to see Hopkins. Lucius approaches, and from the shadows, he asks the man what he's looking for. He's surprised by the sudden voice, and turns in Lucius's direction, and explains that he's looking for Hopkins, and that he doesn't need to speak with a lawyer. Lucius steps out and says that he's no mere lawyer, and introduces himself. He tells the man that his file indicates that Hopkins spoke highly of him, and asks why he's looking for the man. He says thanks, and explains that he has a problem out on the range. It seems to be supernatural, strange even for Malifaux. Lucius says he doesn't see in his file where he became an expert on that, and the man tells him that's why he needs to speak with Hopkins. He then explains the unusual behavior he's been observing in his livestock. They've been unusually territorial and aggressive. Neither man knew it, but at that very moment, the normally docile cattle at his farm had sprouted spines along their backs, and were killing and eating the farmhands, as well as each other. Nearby carrion birds are attracted by the bloodshed, and as they pick the flesh off the corpses, they begin snapping at each other. The man finally convinces Lucius to come take a look, and when the two approach the farm, they see a horrible scene of carnage. Lucius was not a man to be easily taken by surprise, but he whispers, "What the hell?" and as he turns his horse away from the ranch, it makes a sound like a growl. The offices are mostly empty, and Lucius walks up behind Hoffman and asks him if he's working late. Hoffman jumps, as he thought he was alone, and replies that he's just trying to wrap his head around a few things that have been puzzling him. Lucius turns to Ryle, who's standing in the corner, and tells Hoffman that he sees his brother still watches over him, or is he looking to him for help? Hoffman says he wouldn't know, as Lucius of all people knows how he feels about the grafted. Lucius tells him that he can only imagine the pain he must be caused, a constant reminder of what he had lost, and adds that it's a shame he can only stand there like that, as he's well armored. He says that he'll see if he can get some use out of him. Hoffman replies that he's welcome to, but that he seems to only obey him. Lucius says confidently that he wouldn't worry about that, and that he's sure he'll follow his commands. After a pause, he says that he has some material for him, and puts a book down on Hoffman's desk. He says it's from Sonia Crid's collection, one of the few left intact from the temple at Nithom, a ruin south of Kythera. Hoffman asks what it has to do with him, and Lucius explains that it has notes of particular interest to him and his work. He explains that it's Neverborn, and that Crid and her staff translated much of it, but that the schematics will probably make more sense to him. He asks Hoffman to report to him immediately if he finds any indication of where the Neverborn might have conducted their experiments, and that they'd like to track down Sonia Crid as well, as she's gone missing. Hoffman thumbs through the book and seems to realize how important it is, and Lucius asks knowingly if he sees anything interesting. The secretary then turns and speaks to Ryle in a hushed tone, and gives Hoffman a sidelong glance as he races out of the room. A lawyer asks the head engineer of the guild's transport department if the new proposed system for the routing of air cards will work. He says yes enthusiastically, and asks where they got the plans. The lawyer takes the documents they were looking at back, and thanks the man, telling him that will be all. As he leaves, the lawyer turns to Lucius, and the secretary tells him he wants the plans put into operation immediately. The lawyer replies that it will be done, and then says that their man would like to return, as he is scared for his safety. Lucius says there is one more task that he requires of him, and to tell the man that Lucius never ceases contemplating the harm that might befall him. Meanwhile, elsewhere, English Ivan is leading a raid on the guild. He tricks Lucius's mole in the Union into handing over the plans he's stolen to the prototype Leviathan. He then tells the man that the schematics for the aircar network that he stole were a plant, and were actually going to sabotage the system. Just then, a group of criminally insane patients at the sanitarium who were given stimulants start a riot as the aircars begin colliding and causing explosions. English Ivan, Eva Havenhand, and Gibson DeWalt use the chaos for cover and manage to break into a warehouse full of peacekeepers and reprogram them. They march them off into the night, having captured them for their employer. Lucius looks on as the Governor General receives reports from several of his agents. One of the men explains that the recent volcanic activity has caused much of the drinking water to become contaminated, and a recent drought has claimed much of the surface water. Kitchener then prompts another of the investigators for his report on the livestock, and the man tells him that some sort of strange affliction is affecting all of the non-native species in Malifaux, who were brought there from Earthside. Though normally docile and domesticated, they've become violent, scratching and biting at anything near them, and refusing to eat anything except for flesh. The Governor General asks him how far it's spread, and he says that it will likely affect all of the ranches within a month. When asked for a cause, he says it's unknown, but he would guess that it's Malifaux. Another agent chimes in that all of this doesn't bode well for the social climate of Malifaux, and the Governor General, who's angry that she spoke out of turn, tells her that it's not her job to gauge the demeanor of the city, it's his. She apologizes, and then explains that the plague has also spread beyond the quarantine zone. Another investigator then explains that various groups have risen up among the city and engaged in rebellious activities. He speculates that they seem to have cropped up independently, and the Governor General tells him that there will likely be Arcanist and possibly Resurrectionist connections, and to continue probing. The man then adds that many people have decided that they couldn't make it in Malifaux and have begun returning to Earth. The Governor General cuts him off and turns to Lucius and tells him to cut off transport through the breach, except for soulstone runs and essential goods. Lucius asks if they should cut off immigration as well, and he says no travel, and to double the guardsman's watch. It's time to declare martial law. Lucius tells him it'll take time to implement such changes, and he responds that there's no time. He is to do it immediately, and spare no manpower. Lucius goes to see Perdita, who was at the epicenter of the event when it happens, and has been unconscious ever since. He finds her in her hospital bed, and conceals himself as he watches her doctor speak to her and creepily touch her face. He reveals himself and startles the doctor, and then orders the man to leave. Once he does, he approaches Perdita and tells her that they have need for her, as he crushes a soulstone in his hand and squeezes her face. He commands her to wake up, and suddenly her eyes open, though they are deep black, with silver and purple wisps floating inside. After one of his underlings conducted an unsuccessful interrogation, Lucius enters the interrogation room and sits down across from Lucas McCabe. There's a guard laying on the floor, and McCabe's knuckles are bloody, and Lucius asks him what happened, and he tells him he slipped. He takes out McCabe's file and starts reading all the information they have on him. It includes the arrest for the death of his fiancée and several accusations of tomb robbing. It seems he had left Egypt ahead of some angry people. Lucius tells him they both know this, but what he doesn't know is why he would make such a careless mistake. McCabe says everyone makes mistakes, and Lucius tells him he thinks he's being followed by some people he stole from Earthside, and he has nowhere to turn. So he attempted to smuggle old Malifaux artifacts Earthside like a novice to get caught. He's a man who doesn't like asking for help, but this was his way of doing just that. McCabe says that the guild helping him would involve McCabe helping the guild. He adds that he has heard the Governor General protects folks like him. Lucius confirms and elaborates that it's sometimes at their request, and sometimes at the request of their families. He says the Governor General is in need of a historian with his talents. He'd like to send him to recover certain artifacts for the Governor General's personal collection. They can provide him resources, and he will be in their employ, and therefore, under their protection. McCabe says he would rather have a nice vacation in a guild jail, and Lucius shoots back that in that case, he'll have the charges against him dropped and send him back to Earth, and he'll be sure to let his friends know he's coming home. McCabe says he wondered when the threats would start, and that they have a deal. Lucius then tells him that he'll be sending some guild personnel along with him. They needed some time away from the city anyway. McCabe replies that it's a shame they're starting off their relationship with a lack of trust. Lucius arrives alone at a ball in a fancy carriage. His appearance impresses everyone, and he's soon flooded by well-wishers and sycophants seeking his attention. He goes inside to meet the host of the evening, and then begins dancing with a guest. He's very graceful, and nearby, a woman dances closer to him as she prepares the poisoned needle in a ring on her finger. As she gets close, the man who she's dancing with, who she thought was very drunk and sloppy, suddenly looks her dead in the eyes, and then presses the needle into her own hand, a death sentence. Without causing a disruption, he carries the woman to a side hall and out of the room. As Lucius leaves the dance floor to converse with other guests, a man stands on a balcony and prepares the hidden firing mechanism in his cane. He sees Lucius stop and bends down to pretend to rub his bum leg, taking the opportunity to aim down the length of the cane. When he looks again, Lucius is staring directly at him, and then a waiter approaches, balancing a tray of drinks. The man steps in close and asks him if he wants another drink, as he slides a long sharp blade between the assassin's ribs and pierces his heart. The waiter says he must be having a dizzy spell, he better sit down, as he lowers the man onto a bench, and then gives him a nod and walks away. As Lucius continues doing the rounds, a third assassin sits down across the room from him, and then detaches from his own body. His incorporeal form moves through the room, and finds Lucius talking to the other guests. He reaches out a hand towards the secretary's heart, preparing to stop it, in a murder that could never be traced. He suddenly senses that he's being watched, and turns to find a woman staring directly at him. She shouldn't be able to see him at all, and she mouths the words, "Naughty, naughty." She then turns as a waiter approaches the assassin's body, and he sees a flash of metal, and then blood swelling on his white shirt, as the room blackens. Lucius heads to the hallway, and finds the man who hired all the assassins. He greets him and tells him it's been a successful evening. The man said he hadn't noticed, and Lucius says no matter. It was quite the evening, full of enthusiastic dancing, and comments that he even had a near miss himself. He goes on, saying that it was bound to happen, as he came without his retinue tonight. They had told him that some villain would take a pot shot at him, but he thought it was absurd. The man stammers out a reply, and Lucius says that he feels revitalized, on a spiritual level, and his heart is beating stronger for it. He then tells the man good evening, and turns to leave. As he makes it outside, the man suddenly grabs a knife off a tray and charges at him. The secretary doesn't even turn, as a shot rings out from across the street, and hits the man dead in the chest. Lucius gets in the wagon, and greets the man that's inside. He tells him that he had an enjoyable evening, and the other man says that he was glad to provide a small service. Lucius says his forecast of the man's plans to assassinate him were quite accurate, and the other man smiles but then looks uneasy. The man struggles a bit, but then asks Lucius if they can discuss the final obligations of their deal. Lucius says, ah yes, the reward for his treachery. The man laughs and says it's strongly phrased, but surely he would agree that what he did was in Lucius's best interest. Lucius says he doubts that. If he was ever concerned for anything other than himself, he would know the types of qualities that Lucius looks for in a business associate. The man breathes more heavily, and Lucius says he can't abide treachery. Even the man who hired the assassins was to be admired for his drive and concision. The man stammers that he tried to have Lucius killed, and Lucius says he displayed courage and ambition. He wanted to replace Lucius, and though he may have been misguided, he was only trying to better the guild, and therefore all of Malifaux. What did this man do? Squander a principled man's life, and then ask for a reward. He looks down at the man as the carriage stops, and asks him if he remembers the brandy that he drank when they first met to discuss this night. It contained a slow-acting poison, and as one of Lucius's guards takes him out of the carriage, the secretary explains that he had killed him 2 days ago, the moment he betrayed his friends. That is all the reward he deserves. After 6 guild guards go missing, an investigation is started to search the whole guild enclave. That night, Dr. McMorning is involved in an incident where 6 guild guards allegedly caught the culprit, but then died in an explosion. After doing some investigating, Lucius heads down to the morgue and waits for McMorning. When McMorning makes it back to the morgue, he finds Lucius there waiting for him. The secretary is reading a paper, and as he puts it down, he comments to McMorning that it's interesting that no one in the guild has ever heard of the 6 men who had died. He adds that his men also found a trail of partially rotten body parts along the whole patrol route McMorning claims he followed. McMorning says that there's a good explanation for this, as he goes to pick up a scalpel off of his desk. In the blink of an eye, Lucius draws his sword and stays McMorning's hand. He then says that what's even more interesting is the cache of body parts and embalming fluid that his men found down one of the tunnels near the morgue. He pushes the sword and cuts into McMorning's hand, and then he adds that he has something in common with the captain, because he admires McMorning's initiative. McMorning is confused, and Lucius continues, saying that the doctor's talents are wasted here, and asks him if he wouldn't prefer to work somewhere where he'll get better funding and more manpower away from the prying eyes of judgmental minds. McMorning says that he does not think many people would judge his proclivities so warmly, and Lucius says he would be surprised. McMorning inquires as to what Lucius would get out of this, and Lucius pauses and then takes off his mask. McMorning looks and then smiles. A guild Austringer writes a coded letter to his friend, telling him that he thinks something's going on with Lucius. He has insomnia, and when he's up late at night, he frequently sees Lucius going off to have secret meetings with Daciel. They meet without any guards, which strikes the Austringer as suspicious, since they usually don't go anywhere without guards. Perhaps there's something they don't want anyone else to hear. He tells his friend that if he goes missing, he should spread the word to the other Austringers. One day they're hunting a criminal in the swamp, and the man falls asleep due to his insomnia. The criminal sneaks up on him, and would have gotten him if not for the fact that his raptor alerted him to the man's presence. They defeat him, and he kills the criminal with his hands, the first time he's ever done that. He had suspected that Lucius knew he was following him to his meetings, and therefore stopped going to them. So after the battle in the swamp, he pretends his injuries are worse than they are, so that Lucius will think he's incapacitated. He's proven right when the first night he's in the hospital, Lucius sneaks off. He trails him anyway, and is surprised to find that the man goes to the quarantine zone. He loses track, but the next time he goes out, he tracks the man through the quarantine zone, and finds him meeting with Dr. McMorning. They go inside a building, and through the window he can see that inside there's an undead. The man runs away as fast as he can. Captain Daciel had recommended him for a promotion, claiming that the man he defeated in the swamp was a wanted criminal. He suspects that this is just a plan to get rid of him, and he's fairly sure the criminal was just a common thief. One night, he tracks Lucius, who unexpectedly goes outside the city. To his horror, he finds the man meeting with a Neverborn, and is frozen in fear, and when his raptor screeches, Lucius turns and stares directly in his direction. Eventually, he walks away, but the Austringer starts to think that Lucius might be onto him. Soon, Lucius comes to visit him during a training session to tell him that he's being put in for the promotion. The man fears that he'll never be seen again, but he had discovered the secret exit that Lucius had been using to sneak out at night. He decides to use the exit the next time Lucius goes out to sneak into Lucius's home and try to find something to discredit him. He writes a very short letter, indicating that he discovered Lucius is not what he appears to be, and that he made it into the house, but that he's been caught. Weeks later, the Austringer's friend writes a letter to Lucius, telling him that his friend was promoted and transferred back Earthside, but has not been heard from ever since, and asking if Lucius can look into it. In response, he gets a letter, indicating that the man was killed in a Neverborn attack. The Right Honorable Lucius Gustavius Fitzwilliam Matheson. He moves like a shadow, and has a voice like soft footsteps. He possesses several advanced degrees from Earthside, but what brought such a sophisticated man over to Malifaux? No one really knows. Lucius has no friends, no lovers, and no confidants. Nobody realizes how much power Lucius wields, or how many members of the guild are loyal directly to him. No one knows where he goes in the dead of night, when he heads into the quarantine zone or out into the Neverborn haunted wilderness. No one knows, and that fills Lucius with quiet glee. A man named Niccolo paints a portrait for a member of Malifaux's high society named Herman. Niccolo has had a talent ever since coming through the breach to see the aura that surrounds individuals. He uses the color of the aura to shade their paintings, and it makes them very beautiful. Herman gets impatient from having to sit still for so long and decides to call it a night. As Niccolo goes to leave, there's a knock on the door, and Lucius barges in with 2 of his attendants. Herman asks to what he owes the pleasure, and Lucius cuts him off and says he knows why he's here. The secretary tells the man that he has evidence he's been embezzling money from the governor's treasury. One of his lawyers starts reading a confession from the man's secretary, and explains that the punishment for the crime is death. He yells that that man is lying, and that he was a disobedient oaf who's holding a grudge. The lawyer explains that they have even more evidence, and the man starts to sweat. The lawyer continues, explaining that he's being charged with threatening a fellow guild member to cover up the crime. He asks if he has anything to say in his defense. Herman turns to Lucius, pleading, and asks if he's really going to execute him. Lucius says heavens no, and the man relaxes and thanks him, but then Lucius clarifies that his attendant is going to do it. The large man grabs him and draws him towards the fire, and then stuffs his face into the burning coals. After over a minute goes by, the man stops struggling, and Lucius sits there the whole time like he's listening to a symphony. When it's over, he calls out to Niccolo by name, saying that he knows he's watching. When Niccolo comes out, Lucius introduces himself, and Niccolo asks how he knows his name. Lucius says that he's a popular artist known for painting with excellent lighting, and seems to be able to see what others cannot. Niccolo looks at him and notices that he has no aura, only emptiness. Lucius looks at the half-finished portrait and says it's beautiful, but not his best work. The lighting is off. Niccolo thinks that he knows about his ability, and as Lucius draws a sword out of his cane, he closes his eyes, expecting it to be the end. Lucius merely slashes the portrait on the throat and says that rats have to be terminated, or smoked out as it seems. He then tells Niccolo that his office lacks a portrait and it's a problem that needs to be rectified. The man says that it would be an honor, and Lucius tells him to be at his office at the Enclave the next day. He tells him he better show up, or he'll be executed too, and that he is to paint exactly what he sees this time, no more, no less. When Niccolo enters the office, it's massive and only has a small desk and a chair. There's a large window that gives a beautiful view of the square. Lucius asks him what he thinks, and he says that it isn't what he expected. The secretary says the office is merely a place where he's obligated to sit. The consequences of his work he can see out there as he gestures to the city. Niccolo tells him that he must have records and books and ledgers as a secretary, and Lucius replies that secretary is a loosely defined word. His work is in his head. He internalizes all of the information. Paper is for fools. Niccolo suggests they start, and Lucius orders a watcher to leave them and bring the report about Herman and his accident to the Governor General. He tells it to tell McMorning to fill in the forms appropriately and remind him of their previous arrangement. Niccolo asks Lucius how he wants him to paint, and he says remember what he said the day before, to paint him as he sees him. Niccolo says he'll paint him standing, and when Lucius asks why, he says it will portray the authority of his presence, and Lucius approves. An hour goes by in silence before Lucius asks what Genoa is like. Niccolo asks how he knows he's from there, and Lucius says he's wearing shoes made by a renowned cobbler from Genoa. It's his job to know. Niccolo says Genoa has changed ever since, and he trails off. Lucius says he knows that the city was sacked by the guild, as he was there. He asks if that is why Niccolo ended up in Malifaux. Niccolo says he must already know, it's his job to know. Lucius agrees, but says that he wants to see if Niccolo will lie to him. The man explains that he was a refugee. He lost everything, including his family. Where else was he to turn, except Malifaux? Lucius asks why he would work for people who sacked his city and who he clearly hates. Niccolo doesn't answer, and Lucius says he knows why, because he's a paradox and a hypocrite. He works for the coin, and sees the luxury and opulence of his customers, and pretends not to notice. Niccolo explains that it's not in his nature to hate, only to survive. The secretary then says that Malifaux is only about survival, and Niccolo counters that it used to be different. Lucius asks what he knows about how Malifaux used to be, and the man says that there were beings here before. Lucius approaches him slowly, and asks what he knows about those beings. He says that they lived here before the humans, and they see us as usurpers, and he can't really blame them. Lucius says that from what he's telling him, he knows very little. The painter asks him to tell him what he knows, as the secretary already knows his story. He had been having trouble with the painting so far, but as Lucius starts to talk about the language of the Neverborn, his hand flies across the canvas, and infinite ideas fill his head. Lucius mentions that the language of the Neverborn changes and morphs, as if the speakers do not want outsiders to be able to understand it. Niccolo asks him about the Neverborn themselves, and Lucius goes to his desk and gets a small box that has 4 dead butterflies on display inside. He says that they remind him of the forces they are trying to destroy. Niccolo is confused, and Lucius says that to an insect, the world is huge, and they have no knowledge of the dangers that lie in it. Malifaux was just like that for the Neverborn before the humans. Niccolo asks if they weren't opposed by the tyrants, and Lucius says that the tyrants were like gods and did rule over the Neverborn, but they were overthrown. Going back to the analogy, he says that when the humans arrived, the Neverborn were at peace, like the butterflies before the box. Niccolo asks how all the Neverborn can get along when they seem to be different species, and Lucius explains that some are uniform, like the Nephilim, but some take on whatever form they choose. Niccolo says that he understands, and Lucius clarifies that he does not. He can't possibly understand until he is trapped behind the glass, like the butterflies. The painter starts to feel his eyes get heavy, and he looks down at his work. His heart nearly stops. He thought he was capturing Lucius's essence, but he sees a disfigured and distorted form. The lines make no sense, a hazy mess of scribbles. Lucius looks at it and tells him it's exactly what he expected. He tells Niccolo that we cannot be painted by humans. He points out that Niccolo seems to have been poisoned, as the man collapses, and Lucius says that he sees with his eyes what everyone else sees, but with his mind he sees the truth. He points to the canvas and says, "This is the truth." He explains that he had invited him here as a test. He wanted to see if he could paint his true form. It seems that he paints what his mind perceives, even if he doesn't mean to. He sees them for what they really are, and so he needed to be eliminated. Niccolo lays on the floor, unable to move, and he once again senses the empty void inside Lucius. Lucius tells him that he's shocked he didn't realize what was going on when he was able to tell him so much about the Neverborn. But people like him are the worst of humanity, people who run and sell out for profit, working for their enemy. As he had told him, rats need to be terminated to set a few butterflies free. Niccolo stammers out that they will find out. The secretary shoots back, no, men are so inclined to obey immediate needs that a deceiver will never lack victims for his deceptions. He raises his cane to deliver the fatal blow and says goodbye. Niccolo, like the rest of this world, will soon be ours. The Governor General asks about Herman, and Lucius says he's been dealt with. Kitchener complains that there's martial law and they still can't control their own people. Lucius says it's worse than he knows, and that there are more people hiding in the shadows and working for their own interests. The Governor General says he has full authority to deal with this problem, and Lucius turns to leave, but then stops. He says there's one more thing, and hands the Governor General a box with 5 butterflies. The Governor General says they're beautiful, but asks why the gift. Lucius says it'll be a reminder of how he intends to do the guild justice. Kitchener comments again that they're beautiful, but one looks more vibrant than the rest, like it's fresher. Lucius says yes, it's a recent, artistic addition of his. Lucius sits next to his ethervox as an attendant hands him several small cards. The cards were invitations to tonight's masked Halloween ball, and they're written in Lucius's handwriting. He asks the attendant if he's been greeting the guests according to their plan, but answers for himself that of course he is, as these instructions came from the Governor General himself. He then adds that they don't need anything else to go wrong tonight. The attendant asks if there's anything else he can do to help, and Lucius asks him if he can undo the massacre that took place at the Grey Lord, causing several of their guests to be missing. The man apologizes, clarifying that he didn't know what he meant, and offering to leave Lucius to his call. Lucius tells him that he already had his call, which came directly to his office, which should only be possible for a handful of select people, and that moreover, the caller had his voice disguised. He tells the attendant to leave him, but to send Charles Hoffman to speak with him. In the ballroom, every important person in Malifaux, including politicians, businessmen, and industrialists, all dance with their masks on. The dance is a strange one, but everyone seems to know the steps, without really understanding why. Lucius meets with the Governor General, who tells him that he saw him meeting with Charles Hoffman and sending him away urgently, followed by several constructs. He demands to know what's going on. Lucius explains that their opposition may have a plot to ruin their plans for tonight, and Lucius sent his operative to stop the terrorists if they do exist. A purple spark arises in the Governor General's eye as he tells Lucius that the plan for tonight was his idea, and so he will be responsible for seeing to its execution. Lucius replies that he wouldn't expect anything else, and suggests that the Governor General finish getting dressed so that he can announce the unmasking at midnight, emphasizing that the timing of their plan needs to be precise. The Governor General stands before the assembled crowd and announces that they have all come to the party wearing a mask that represents their role in Malifaux society. But now the time has come to unmask. Every one of the attendees removes their mask and throws it in the air excitedly. After the attendees leave, the Governor General tells Lucius that their plans are not finished. Lucius tells him that they've made the first step and congratulates the man, telling him that he thinks he'll start feeling the effect soon. Kitchener asks him if it will only have an effect on members of the guild and the townsfolk, and Lucius replies that that's all they were able to accomplish tonight, but that it's a good start. The Governor General pauses, and then tells Lucius that the people pushed him to do this, lamenting that if they had only known their purpose and played their role in Malifaux, it may not have been necessary. After all, his laws have a purpose. Lucius agrees, and the Governor General asks if the saboteur was caught. Lucius replies that their plan was foiled, and that the perpetrators would be apprehended shortly. The Governor General tells him that after tonight, all of the guild will move to his will, and pretty soon, so will the rest of Malifaux. Then, where will these treasonous vermin have to hide? The Governor General walks into his mansion, and something seems off. As he walks, he goes from almost floating to jerking forward in a stuttering manner, almost like a poorly run projection. A group of his officers, including Lucius, are waiting to deliver him reports, and he walks up a large staircase and turns to look down on them. Lucius wears a silver mask, the color he usually wears when doing legal business. Bronze is for mundane administrative tasks, gold for special occasions, and pewter for outings. Lucius says he was worried about the Governor General's whereabouts, and there's trouble in the city tonight. McCabe then steps forward and says he found the Resurrectionist's lair, right where the Governor General said. He holds out a bag and says that he found the artifact, just where he said as well. The Governor General snatches it, and another aide is about to speak, but Lucius steps forward and hands the Governor General some star charts. He explains that they include updates for some of the newly changed constellations. He then adds that he met with a member of the Katanaka trading house, and they got the last tokens that they needed. The Governor General shouts back, "Damn the tokens," and the image of him standing there begins to blur. He says he has no more need of works or rituals. He is above them now. He tells Lucius to shut his mouth and get out of the way, so his captain can tell him what's going on in the city. The guard captain tells him that they're under attack in the new reclamation zone, and they're losing ground, but reinforcements are on the way. Kitchener asks what they're fighting, and is told that the reports indicate they're undead and Neverborn. The Governor General says that the Neverborn don't consort with the undead. They hate the humans, but they hate the undead even more. He asks where his loyal agents are, and the aides tell him that Lady Justice is fighting down along the river. Hoffman is preparing more peacekeepers, and there are no reports on Sonia's whereabouts. The Governor General says he doesn't suppose there are, and turns to walk up the stairs. As Governor General Kitchener prepares his ritual to try to ascend to tyranthood, he feels a massive surge of energy. As he tries to harness it, he feels the surge build up until he can no longer control it. The resulting explosion tears a hole in his mansion, killing the Governor General, and his essence fuses with the essence of the tyrant Cherufe, creating the Burning Man. As chaos erupts all around the city, Lucius stands in the ruins of the destroyed mansion. He's alone. All of the other aides fled to the city. He listens to the gunshots and screams in the distance. What lovely music. He takes his mask off and drops it on the ground and begins dancing around the mansion, going through all the wreckage of the rooms that used to be his master's. He loses track of how long he's at it, but eventually returns and puts his mask back on. He steps outside, smells the scent of burning on the air, and then saunters out to greet the new day. Lucius sits in his office as the rain patters on his window and watches a cigar burn. The flavor of the cigar is lost on him. He enjoys watching the destruction. It's a symbol of the transient nature of material things. The cigar is made out of the finest ingredients, requires exacting production, is packaged carefully, and then shipped for countless miles. It's a fine item of luxury, and he just set it on fire. Lucius needed to keep up appearances as a member of high society, which is why he also had a bottle of the finest brandy in his office. He hears the wind scratch at the glass of his balcony door and looks out the window at his reflection. His gold mask is suddenly replaced with a white visage, and the green soulstones in his eyes are replaced by empty black holes. He hears a voice in his head calling him the masked captain. As he sees the woman standing there, he's not afraid. There's more than glass protecting him, and an attack would alert all of the guard in the building. Not that he can't protect himself, he just prefers to let others take the risk for him. Lucius tells the woman that she needs to make an appointment to see him, and she scolds him for living among the vermin, even being counted as one of them, and that they obey his laws. Lucius says he serves as the acting Governor General, so they should, and she counters that they are blind sheep, but she is not. Lucius asks who she is, and she tells him that she's Titania, Queen of the Fae. He would have scoffed, but at that same moment, a pair of razor-sharp wings rise up behind her. Lucius says that's impossible, as Titania is a myth, and the woman tells him that legends were once true, distorted with time, but true nonetheless. Lucius realizes that he never met a queen in his time as secretary, but he knew that they would sound just like the voice in his head. He asks her what she wants of him, and she says her people and his share a common goal of ridding their world of menace and tyranny. She wants to meet with the captains of his kind and declare her return, and strike a banner for her cause. Lucius asks what that is, and she tells him the annihilation of the tyrants. It's the price of freedom for her people, and maybe they can have an alliance with his kin against their common enemy. Lucius considers whether she really could be Titania, and thinks about how her return will affect the balance of power among the Neverborn. Her history is not well known, but it's synonymous with the defeat of the tyrants and betrayal. Titania tells him to call the captains of his people to meet with her. She only wants the opportunity to be heard. What they do after will be their choice. Lucius says he doesn't speak for the rest of them, and they may not come, but Titania shoots back that they will. He knew that she was right, as claiming to be Titania would get her a lot of attention from the Neverborn, but maybe not the kind she wanted. She flies away, and Lucius is left standing alone, thinking about how Titania is known for having sacrificed many of her people for her own gain. She was an unpredictable force, but she might also represent unity. He doesn't know how good she is at diplomacy, but she is a seasoned battle commander who ruled for centuries. She could represent the Neverborn's freedom from persecution. After the Governor General's death, Lucius surrounded himself with the finer things in life, acting as if he had gotten a promotion due to the sudden death of his boss. He knew it was all a charade, but he found it pleasant nonetheless. When he found out that someone had discovered the ruins at Nythera, he was confident that no human would be able to open the vault. Deciding to err on the side of caution, he sought to get information about the expeditions there, but was too late, and by the time he made any progress, Titania was free. Lucius found the situation amusing. He had finally successfully maneuvered the Governor General out of the picture, only for a more dangerous threat to appear. He was already formulating schemes and contingencies, aiming to limit the Autumn Queen's influence and turn her strengths to his own purposes. Lucius stands on the roof of the courthouse, looking over the chaos that's beneath him. It's been 2 months since the Governor General's death, and he had spent that time maneuvering to gain more power. He had been patient, taking it one step at a time, to expand his influence and eliminate his rivals. He had proclaimed the Miners and Steamfitters Union to be complacent in the Governor General's death, and since then the guild had been rounding up union members and sentencing them. There had been so many coming in that the courts were backed up. He hears a voice tell him that he had waited 5 minutes and won't wait another 5. He turns around to see Charles Hoffman and says that he apologizes and asks if the man had trouble with the stairs. Hoffman says he managed and asks why Lucius called him. Lucius starts walking around, forcing Hoffman to keep turning to look at him, and the secretary tells him that he thought they were working together to find the murderer of their late employer. Hoffman says he assigned as many watchers as he could, but he has other tasks to take care of as well. He adds that Sonia is still recovering from her burns, and Lady Justice is still fighting off rezzers in the slums, so there are a lack of high-ranking officials to do certain tasks. Lucius tries to respond, but Hoffman speaks over him, detailing all of the different issues that he's been dealing with. Lucius tries to speak again, and when Hoffman goes to cut him off, the secretary takes a step towards him and says if he interrupts him again, this discussion will take a much less pleasant turn. There's a long pause, and then Hoffman apologizes and says that production in the city is down due to Lucius arresting so many people, and it's hurting the guild. Lucius says he didn't claim the man wasn't busy, but simply that he had questions about his department. He keeps walking in a circle around the man, taking petty pleasure in making Hoffman constantly turn to face him. He explains that 2 watchers went missing in the eastern slums, and Hoffman replies that one of them was recovered and the other is in the custody of the Katanaka trading house. Lucius waves his hand and then says that a squadron of guardians had disregarded a rendezvous and struck out into the slums. Hoffman tells him that they arrived in the burns with only minor damage, and since then have been serviced. Lucius then adds that 4 hunters were supposed to help the death marshals clean up some undead, but never showed up. Hoffman rubs his temples and says that they can't rule out Arcanist interference, but the undead are capable of taking out constructs as well, and they shouldn't be surprised that some of them haven't made it back. Lucius stops and asks where his brother is these days, and Hoffman clenches his fists and tells Lucius that if he has issues with how he runs his division, he can file a report with the new Governor General in a week when he arrives. The man then turns to leave, and Lucius tells him that he worries that he thinks he's getting away with it. Lucius had disappeared from his office for a few days. He had spent his time reassuring both Lilith and Titania that he was on their side and theirs alone. He enjoyed playing the game. It thrilled him to watch Lilith try to figure out what he actually is. She's too proud to admit that she doesn't know, and he would drop little hints about his nature to mislead her. Titania knew what he was, but she didn't know how dangerous or how crafty. Lucius also didn't know everything about her, and he needed to figure her out. By contrast, the thought of dealing with the new Governor General was boring to him. As he strides into the Governor General's manor, he thinks about how long it'll take him to have his new boss in line. 10 days, he decides, before he can play him like the Stradivarius that he has locked in his quarters. Lucius approaches the crown room, where he was told the Governor General was waiting for him. He had always liked the crown room. It was big and regal, and he had taken many meetings with the old Governor General there. It's only fitting that he would meet the new Governor General for the first time in the same room. When he enters, the room is full of people shuffling papers, and Governor General Marlowe calls out and points him to a place at the end of the table. Lucius tells the Governor General that he didn't expect him to arrive a week early, and that he would like to set up a one-on-one meeting. The Governor General replies that he missed the first meeting 2 days ago, and they tried to find him, but he was missing. Very unprofessional. He then shakes his head and said that it's a good thing he was early, otherwise who would have been running the city? Lucius is about to speak, but Marlowe says there's no time to waste. They need to get him caught up. He tells the secretary to sit down, and explains that Earth is in chaos with the arrival of the Burning Man, and they need a strong, stable Malifaux city now more than ever. Lucius realizes that he needs to re-exert his control, so he speaks up and says that there's a pressing matter they need to discuss. Charles Hoffman has been using guild resources to pursue personal goals. The Governor General raises his eyebrows and tells Lucius that without Hoffman, the guild would have fallen apart while Lucius was off who knows where. They're still dealing with the fallout from Lucius's terrible idea to round up the Union members, an issue that they would be getting back to. Marlowe goes on about several other issues, and after a few moments he turns to Lucius and asks him if he's going to wear that blasted mask the whole meeting. Lucius snaps the pen that he was holding in half. Lucius walks down the halls of the Guild Enclave with a group of sycophants and hangers-on. A year ago, he would have thought that was beneath him, but since Governor General Marlowe took over, Lucius had found it increasingly difficult to manipulate the guild. He calls out to one of his assistants and tells him to let Marlowe know that he will be traveling to Edge Point tomorrow on some boring business about zoning codes. The man asks him if he wants him to book him a ticket, and Lucius turns to him and stares at the man. He wilts in fear, and Lucius very harshly tells him that if he wanted him to book him travel, he would have said so. Lucius realizes that scolding the man was beneath him as well, but it made him feel like he still had some semblance of power. As they continue walking, they hear a scream from the nearby break room, and they all stop. After a minute, a guardsman walks out with a head in her hand. Lucius notices that it isn't bleeding and appears to be frozen. Dr. McMorning. She says someone put a head in the icebox, and Lucius points his cane at the woman and calls out that she is a rezzer. The woman tries to protest, but one of his assistants draws a gun and shoots her between the eyes. As the woman falls to the ground, Lucius smiles. It felt good to exercise his authority. He hoped the woman was one of the honest ones. He tells them to have the head sent to McMorning and to tell him that the break room icebox is not an overflow for his morgue. As they continue walking, he goes on casually, telling them to contact Winston Finnegan and book him a dirigible. Money is no object. Lady Justice sits in her office, brooding about the fact that she never knew McMorning was a resurrectionist. It seems so obvious to her now. Lucius walks up to her door, and Justice calls out to him that she isn't in the mood for gloating. He lowers the hand he was about to use to knock, and then responds that he isn't either, and asks if he can come inside. She motions to a chair, and he sits down. As Justice is about to ask him what he wants, he speaks up and says that he heard about her dressing down from the Governor General after failing to stop McMorning and protect the ritual to banish the grave spirit. Justice replies that it is gloating, and he says on the contrary, as they both find themselves in a similar position. Justice is confused, and Lucius elaborates that they've both found their authority diminished, and they're now drowning in bureaucracy and paperwork anytime they want to do anything. He's surprised that she even still has her job after her last failing. Justice resists the urge to throw him out, and instead tells him that Marlowe still thinks he's on Earth and doesn't understand the nature of the threat. Lucius says it seems like she needs a notable victory, as he would hate to see her turned into a pretty face on a recruitment poster, as Marlowe has planned. Justice tells him over her dead body, she'll sooner toss her badge in his face and walk off into the quarantine zone. Lucius adds that her marshals would follow, and the guard would then be assigned to handle the rezzers. No doubt they would all be turned, and soon the guild would be fighting a particularly dim-witted horde of enemies. Lady J tells him to be careful, as that almost sounded like praise for her division, and the secretary replies that it is. There's a reason he rarely bothers to interfere with her work. The rezzers are a blight on the city, and he doesn't want to see the guild abandon the fight against them over some petty politics. He puts down a manila envelope and tells her that this should help. She asks him what he wants in return, and he says nothing. If Marlowe won't help her, then he will. She opens the folder and reads the braille writing. It's an observation report on a warehouse she suspects her most wanted rezzer of using, and it tracks him back to a mansion in the slums. Justice goes to thank Lucius, but he's already gone. She's confident he'll call in a favor in return, but for now she didn't care. She was back on Nicodem's trail. Lucius hates how the Governor General's mansion has become a flurry of administrative activity lately. No one makes gestures of respect towards him anymore. There's a lack of fear. Governor General Marlowe was now insisting on procedure and paperwork to get anything done. Ordering people around on a whim and making threats had always worked for Lucius before. He goes into the crown room and there's a flurry of activity. Once at his assigned place, someone hands him a paper and tells him that he has to sign in for attendance. His lip curls. Marlowe asks why he's late, and he tells him that he was attending to a legal matter. The Governor General shoots back that he didn't get an absentee request, and Lucius retorts that if his scribe was allowed to come into these meetings, he could have any report that he wanted. Marlowe says no, and asks why he can't do his own work by himself. The meeting continues chaotically, with people discussing different problems, contract negotiations with Ironsides, rats coming out of the sewers, missing people in the northern hills. Lucius watches the bureaucratic monster as people argue. He had always been enraged at the disrespect Marlowe showed him, and then at the fact that the man was actually competent. The secretary had shown remarkable restraint, as he had only killed a few people in his anger. As the meeting gets more chaotic, with people arguing over scheduling and allocation of resources, Lucius starts to form a plan. He turns to a man named Collins and asks him about the rat problem. He suggests that they use the rat catchers, and when the man tells him that they won't work for the guild, Lucius says he's good at negotiating. Collins asks him to give it a try on his behalf, and Lucius turns to walk out. Marlowe asks him where the hell he's going, and Lucius says that he has to make sure that he can account for all of these issues from a legal perspective. Lucius heads to the slums and enters the office of a rat catcher. On his way in, he thinks about how the only thing that humans have to offer was fashion. He could kill for some well-cobbled leather shoes. In fact, he had. When he goes inside, he's surprised to find a nicely decorated office, and a woman who wouldn't look out of place among his lawyers. He tells her it's a shame that such a successful business is still in the slums. It hits on a sore point for her, just as his intelligence had predicted. She says that they wouldn't let her operate anywhere else, and Lucius tells her that they should change that. He explains that he can arrange for an office in the industrial zone. In exchange, he wants them to take a job exterminating in the sewers. She tells him that she'll discuss it with her colleagues, but they value their independence, and Lucius replies that he'll have his lawyers deliver the contracts in the morning. Colin confronts Lucius and tells him that he was meant to negotiate with the rat catchers in his stead, but all the contracts have Lucius's name on them. The secretary tells him that the rat catchers would only sign with him because he was the one who handled all the negotiations. The other bureaucrats in the room congratulate him and indicate that they're already seeing results. Another woman asks about details on how Marlowe will deal with an Arcanist attack, and he says that he's been too busy to explain the plan to her. She asks for a written report, and he says that he hasn't had time to put one together yet, and the woman shoots back that he was the one that put these policies in place. Lucius smiles at the latest failure of the system. The woman points out that Lucius was one of the few people who could get anything done lately, and asks his opinion. Lucius takes the opportunity to make a few jabs at Marlowe, pointing out that he had cracked down on the Union when he was acting Governor General. Lucius goes back to his office and says he needs the report on the missing couriers. They appear on his desk, and the scribe goes back to his place near the door, inconspicuously. He sips a bourbon. He couldn't taste it, and the alcohol has no effect on him, but all the work that went into making the drink gave him a feeling of superiority. He reads a report of Karis making attacks near the records office, and is concerned for some of the documents that are kept there. He writes a letter and seals it, and then sends the scribe to go to the records office. He wants certain documents transferred to a more secure location. Hours later, a man knocks on his door and reports that the records he had asked for had been transferred to the Governor General's manor, but the couriers never made it, and they suspect that it was an Arcanist attack. Lucius demands that he find those records, and then knocks back another bourbon. At another meeting, Marlowe gets a report that the records building had been burned down, in addition to some of Hoffman's workshops, all in Arcanist attacks. The Governor General asks how they knew where Hoffman's workshops were, and is told that they had stolen some records when they were transferred to his manor. The Governor General tells them to fire the record keeper, who requested the transfer, but Lucius cuts in and said that he was just doing what was practical. The other administrators agree. Lucius then adds that their resources can't keep up with all of the Governor General's new projects. Marlowe tells him that he doesn't need his opinion. There's more chaos, and Lucius enjoys watching Marlowe unravel. He realizes that the man has been his most worthy opponent since the humans had arrived in Malifaux. Suddenly, Perdita bursts in the room and says that she was told she needed to make an appointment with Marlowe to see him, so she's scheduling some time right now. Marlowe asks her why she isn't in the Northern Hills, searching for the cause of the missing people, and she says that she needs more men. That place is like a maze. One of the other administrators explains that entire settlements had been going missing, and that there were rumors of puppet-looking constructs. Lucius curls his lip and suspects he knows the cause of that problem. Marlowe says she can't have more people, and Perdita complains, but Lucius butts in. He suggests that whatever is up there might respond better to litigation than force. Perdita asks him if he thinks they'll respond to a court summons, and he says that the law can be very powerful. Perdita snorts, and Marlowe tells them to figure it out among themselves. The monster hunter tells Lucius that if he can solve the problem in 48 hours, she will eat her hat. Lucius replies that he'll be happy to simply have her owe him a favor. She agrees, and then leaves. Lucius takes a train to Ridley with some of his staff and Captain Dachel. When they arrive, he sneaks away while they all sleep to seek out Zoraida in the swamps. She asks him if he got her message, as a mire golem rises up behind her in a threatening manner. She tells it to settle down, and then asks if he's ready to play a game. Lucius asks her what the stakes are, and she says if he wins, she will tell him where to find what he's looking for. If she wins, she wants to know exactly what he is. He says he would rather keep her guessing, and makes a counteroffer that she just tell him what he wants. She asks why she would do that, and he says that he has something that will benefit all of the Neverborn. He will eliminate the rogue element. Zoraida thinks, and Lucius pushes by asking if she thinks she can rely on it in the upcoming conflict. He knew he had won. Zoraida says they have a deal, and they shake hands. They play a quick game of cards, and Zoraida wins, and she tells him that she knows he isn't a Nephilim because he's too slippery with his words. Lucius simply tilts his head, and she continues, saying that he's no skinwalker, and she knows a doppelganger when she sees one. Lucius thinks to himself that if she even considered that, then she was further away from the truth than he thought. She tells him he blends in with the humans well, but lacks that fresh skin smell, and then asks why he wears the mask and gloves. He says that it's a requirement of his profession, and he asks her for her guess. She pauses, and then guesses that he is a woe. Lucius tells her that he is as much woe as he is sorrow, and that that's as much as he will tell her. She tells him that he's impossible, and he asks her about the issue at the settlements near Ridley. She tells him that he will find what he's looking for, near a settlement called 32J, and to make sure to take care of it properly. She hands him a small music box and tells him to use it, and he thanks her. She says she will find out what he is one day, and he replies, perhaps, and maybe she will live long enough to see him fulfill his destiny. Lucius and his group make their way to the most recent town that they lost contact with, and they find that it's completely abandoned. Lucius gets a hunch, and then leads them into the woods, and they encounter animated puppets. Lucius orders his men to hold them off, while he tries to reason with their leader. He splits off, and Dachel follows him, and the secretary dodges attacks from the puppets, while Dachel follows up and kills them. Lucius takes out a music box that plays a song, and they soon encounter a tall puppet with 4 arms. He scolds the puppet, telling it that it broke their agreement to only take children who would not be missed. Collodi replies that the music had suddenly stopped, and Lucius tosses it a music box, and adds that it didn't need to kill whole settlements to bring the music back. The puppet starts pacing, speaking to itself in different voices, and trying to explain its actions to Lucius. The secretary lowers his voice to not be overheard, and tells Collodi that he knows it had been lonely since the first breach closed, but that does not mean it can go around turning all the humans into puppets. He asks it to stop this behavior. Collodi shakes its head, and Lucius tells it that he's left with no choice, and he draws his sword and thrusts. Collodi dodges out of the way as more puppets begin attacking. As they get closer to Lucius, he calls out to Dachel to cover him, and Collodi uses the opening to attack. It hits Lucius in the face and knocks his mask off, and the secretary looks at Dachel and calls for help. Dachel is horrified by the scarred and disfigured face, but he shakes it off and rejoins the battle. Collodi again attacks Lucius and stabs him in the shoulder, but the secretary just snarls, and then seizes the soul stones Collodi was using to control the puppets, and throws them into the forest. He takes off his gloves, revealing claws on the ends of his fingers, and Collodi tries to back away as he loses control of his minions. Lucius advances towards him as he makes verbal threats, and when he catches the puppet, he begins tearing him apart limb from limb. As he reaches down to tear off Collodi's head, the puppet speaks, "Ashes, ashes, we all fall down." Lucius responds, "Not everyone," and tears off the puppet's head, squeezing it in his hand until it cracks. He's interrupted by the sound of a voice, and he turns to see his scribe, offering him his mask and a new set of gloves. The scribe warns him that the others are coming, so Lucius makes himself presentable and puts Collodi's head in a bag. He calls out to Daciel, who joins him, and tells the man that he appreciates his skill with his weapon. Daciel nods, and then Lucius adds that he appreciates his discretion in this matter even more. The captain replies, "Sure thing, boss," and Lucius asks him if he would like for him to put in a good word and recommend that Daciel be promoted to commander. Daciel says that he likes the sound of that, and Lucius walks off as his other subordinates approach. Lucius heads to the crown room and is stopped by Perdita. She says that he's looking very alive, and he tells her that he told her so. She asks him how he did it, and he tells her that it's all in the report. As he heads inside, many of the members of the staff congratulate him. One of the assistants is just finishing going over the report he wrote about the miner who developed some weird powers, stole some soul stones, and destroyed several towns. Lucius had charged him with many crimes, and then executed him when he became hostile. Marlowe asks why Perdita couldn't handle such a thing, and Perdita says she hunts beasts with fangs and claws. She's not an expert at tracking a single man through those parts. It was a nightmare. The assistant suggests that Lucius might have had an edge because lawyers have investigative insight. Lucius explains that he was just fortunate to have Daciel along, and more of the people in the room congratulate him as he feels the power dynamic shifting. When he goes home, the scribe hands him Collodi's repaired head on a platter. He goes down into the basement, which is full of shelves, and he places the head among the other artifacts and curios. As he puts it down, its eyes roll and its jaw opens as if to speak, but Lucius tells it to stay quiet. It's not yet time for his next show. He looks through some file folders, Cochrane, Hoffman, Justice, and grabs the one that says Marlowe. He hears footsteps as Captain Daciel approaches, and he asks the man what he's brought him. Daciel says it's the report he wanted, and he hands it over and then leaves. Lucius puts the file in Marlowe's folder, and then begins to read. He speaks out loud, "So that's your secret. Your vulnerability. How unexpected." Lucius stands next to his bodyguard and watches as in the distance, the Governor General's mansion burns. The fire hasn't made it to the city yet, but the sky is alight, and the Burning Man's arrival has brought chaos and destruction. A woman approaches, and Agent 46 almost kills her, before Lucius tells him he's expecting her. She was a woman from the Governor General's staff, or at least she used to be, until Lucius killed her and had her replaced with a duplicate. He asks her if the Governor General still lives, and she says yes. He's disappointed, and the woman asks him if he did this, referring to the Burning Man. He tells her no, not every story is about him, but he says that it is an opportunity. She points out that it's going to hurt the humans, but it's also going to hurt the Neverborn, and he agrees, but adds that anything that hurts the humans also helps the Neverborn. She asks if he needs anything else, and he says no. The Governor General didn't die, so they'll wait to see what his next move is. He asks her why she remains in this hideous form, and she says that the Governor General and his staff like it, and that it's good to be liked. He wouldn't know. If he were liked or trusted, he wouldn't need her as a spy. He turns back to look at the city again, and considers that all of this represents a huge crack in Marlowe's perfect machine, and it had all been an accident. The whimsy of it filled Lucius with savage joy. And that's it for Mr. Lucius. If anybody made it this far in the video, then congratulations, because that was a super long one. But Lucius is really interesting. He's one of the more interesting characters in the story. I included a lot of the little details about his inner thoughts in this video, because I've always found it really interesting to see how he thinks. He's clearly a spy for the Neverborn, but part of me thinks that maybe he actually likes working for the guild. He certainly doesn't like most people in the guild, but I have a hunch that he actually really likes the power and authority that he gets to wield. And if it weren't for everything going haywire, I've always wondered if he wouldn't just stay undercover and be a politician for the rest of his life. I know he always says he wants to kill all the humans, but I think he's more loyal to himself and the power than he is to the Neverborn. But anyway, tell me what you think about that in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel. We're going to be making some changes around here pretty soon, so you won't want to miss that. If you're curious, come over and hang out on the Discord, and take a look at the Patreon if you wouldn't mind kicking in a few bucks to support the channel. Speaking of, huge shout out to the extremely cool kids here on the Patreon, Steam Powered Scoundrels and Dogmatize, and thanks for watching.